Welcome to Table Talk and Tumbleweeds. We're glad you're back with us today. We are moving into a new project, a new season of the church. And so that means new stuff we're going to talk about, right?
Right.
In particular, we are moving into Lent, which is the season before Easter. And so this comes with a whole lot of theological baggage behind it.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to decide how are we going to enter into this in a way that engages.
And then I think because we're both, well, you're a nerd, I'm nerd light. We decided that we wanted to talk about Lord of the Rings for Lent and connecting the Lenten journey and the idea of pilgrimage with what happens in Lord of the Rings. And I think it's maybe a small disclaimer: the idea of Lord of the Rings for Lent is not unique to us.
Right.
Josh brought this to me. There's a website, and we'll put the link below to it. And it has a whole ton of information and outline, questions, discussion, blog. So if you're really wanting to dig into this, there are those resources available. I will confess that when we started putting this together, I went to the blog and started looking at it, and I thought, well, I'll just skim through this to get some ideas. And it's tens of thousands of pages worth of documents. Maybe not tens of thousands of pages, but I decided it would be
a lot.
Just quicker to reread The Lord of the Rings. So although the rough idea and even some of the outlines of where we start and what important dates certain events happen on, most of this was stuff that we did, that we worked out together, although I suspect that there will be some resonances with.
There must be, because it's the same story.
Because it's the same story, two of the same stories, Lord of the Rings and the Jesus story. Right, so we did the big Pentapalooza during Pentecost.
Yeah.
During Advent, we did a series of videos, and all of those are available below if you've missed them. And now we're doing Lent, and we're focusing on Lord of the Rings, and there are several things that we're doing in this focus. And one of them is this video, this YouTube series, so that you can watch, and we'll be discussing Lord of the Rings, walking with Frodo, and the fellowship throughout the season of Lent, and reflecting on its meaning in terms of the Lenten tradition. We will also have a meeting, in-person meeting for people that are interested in talking about this at the Platte County Library here in Wheatland, and it'll be downstairs in the big room at the Platte County Library, and then of course we will have fellowship, soup and worship at either your church or our church. We haven't
figured that one out.
We haven't decided yet. We'll
Details
post that below as well. So we have a lot of different ways to participate during the season of Lent, and you anyone's invited to participate in all of it. Just because you listen to the video doesn't mean you have to come to the discussion, and just because you come to the discussion doesn't mean you have to have watched the video. So you can do all three, or just one, or just occasional, or however you feel like. Participate however you feel comfortable. Why do Lord of the Rings for Lent, especially if you're maybe not a nerd, or even nerd light?
So do we tell the real story or the true story? So the real story is that we were texting about something, and I think we were trying to figure out, I can't remember what it was, but one of us mistyped Leviticus. And it came out Liv Tyler, and after a few minutes of bafflement, we figured out what we were trying to say, and then one of us said, oh, I really should watch Lord of the Rings again, because she's Arwen, one of the major characters in Lord of the Rings, in that.
The movie, yeah.
And then the other one of us said, oh yeah, we should definitely do that. And then I said, I know about this thing that is Lord of the Rings for Lent, and it matches up. You leave Rivendell on Ash Wednesday, you get to Mount Doom on Good Friday. It sounds like a whole lot of fun, and then we kind of went away with it. So that's the real story. The true story is that this is a journey story that matches up with our story as Christians, even though it is not necessarily a overtly Christian story. The things that happen in it match up with what we expect to happen during Lent.
Yeah, and I think also, that the Christian story and Christian fellowship, getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the Christian community is a journey story, yes. Right? It's not something. I mean, the day you're baptized is not, I've arrived, yeah. Right? The day you're baptized is the day you set out on the journey, and so I think that they're both journey narratives, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that connection is probably not accidental. Story itself is a kind of pilgrimage. Both stories are pilgrimages, right? Then you have Jesus wandering in the desert, Jesus telling stories, right? And I think it's also, and this is my experience with reading Lord of the Rings, and not only once, but I do remember at a very low point in my life, reading Lord of the Rings and reading that journey narrative was part of my healing journey. That's kind of a little too foo-foo, but it was part of my process of coming out of my low period. Was at least in that reading of the Lord of the Rings was like, oh, I have a ring that I don't want to let go of.
You have that burden.
We all have a burden. We all have that thing, but it's the burden that we love, right? That we don't want to let it go. And of course, wondering for myself, would I have the strength? Will I have the strength to let this burden go? But also understand, and again, for me, it was a psychological journey that time, and I've read it different ways and different times. But that was probably. It was during my internship in seminary. That was the point when it really struck me as a very religious novel.
Yeah.
But I think there's before I wander onto my next thought. Okay, just making sure. But also I think that one thing that resonates in both novels, or both the novel and the Gospels and the Christian story, is this idea that, human beings are storytelling creatures, right?
Right.
We tell stories. That's how we make sense of the world around us. We create a story about who we are. If someone says, tell me about yourself, you're going to tell a story. What did you do yesterday? You're going to tell a story. Yep. So human beings, and I'm going to go all the way back to Augustine for this one, right? That human beings experience, time is one moment after another. And yet we experience it coherently. And Augustine makes this refers to time or experience of time as like music, right? You have individual notes, but we don't hear that when we're listening to music. What we hear is the composition. And this is what a coherent life is like, right? That we have this series of notes, which are each moment that we live, and human beings have the capacity to put that together into a coherent composition, which we call a story.
And that coherence is the real crucial part of this entire process. It's not just a matter of saying, well, here's a series of things that happened. It is, here's a story, which has a beginning, a middle, and end. Things occur, things change, things grow, things die. And that coherent story is crucial to understanding who we are as people.
Yes.
And it tells us who we are. We see ourselves in these stories because we are in these stories. And that's going to matter when we talk about speculative fiction things, like The Lord of the Rings, but also other favorite books, favorite movies, favorite every other things. When you watch Star Wars, you love Star Wars because you say, I want to be like that. I want
to live there.
And I want to live in that world.
This world seems awesome to me. But I think coherence is important. But the problem with coherence is that sometimes you can have coherence, at least in the short term. And we've all read a story when we got to the end, we were like, what? The ending, the whole story falls apart. Yeah. And there's other stories when you're reading it, when you're going along and you're like, oh, this is a great story, or this story makes no sense. What is happening here? This is like weird. And then you get to the end and boom. And I think the best example of that of any movie I've ever seen was Sixth Sense. Yeah. Right? And if you didn't get the ending,
it's baffling.
If it wasn't until you got to the end that you understood what was going to happen at the end, you see that ending, and all of a sudden everything you've been watching for 2 hours makes sense. So the idea of coherence is something that really only happens in the long run. And I think that's what goes to then the importance of the Christian story, which is to say that it's not just a coherent narrative, it's living our lives in accordance with a true story. And that true story is what brings long-term coherence to an individual story. And I'm going to drop Stanley Hauerwasser's name again because
I'll spell it down below.
Yeah, and I'll do the let you know where this is from. But Stanley Hauerwas talks about Albert Speer, who worked in the Nazi regime under Hitler, was eventually arrested and put on trial in Nuremberg. And Albert Speer, what he said was, he was a brilliant architect. Right, and he designed some of the great, buildings that the Nazis put as testaments to their fantastic glory. And Speer said, I just wanted to be a great architect, right? And they gave me an opportunity to be a great architect. And what Hauerwas says is that the problem was, I mean, and these are things that we can admire about it. This was a man who was dedicated to his craft, who was brilliant in what he did. But Hauerwas says that Speer never asked himself whether being an architect for the Nazis was something worth doing. And if he'd had a true story to like hold up in front of himself, he might have said, maybe not, maybe not, this is not the direction that I want to go in. So that's, so thinking about narrative and story and pilgrimage, I think that the Lord of the Rings brings a lot of this to the fore. It's an opportunity to talk about them. But I also think, and you and I talked about this a lot over the past few weeks, is that there's a lot of really important shared themes between the Lord of the Rings and the Christian story, and we talked about pilgrimage and journey already, but there's also this idea of burden, which we brought up, fellowship, which is going to end up being quite important, hope, sacrifice, servanthood, and promise, forgiveness, mercy, and the work of discipleship. So all of these themes are in there, and I think one thing sort of, and they're not in there accidentally. No. They're in there in part because of who Tolkien was. So
should we say this is our entry point, and if you want to know more, keep going to the next video?
Yeah, because well, I mean, I think that the question that it begs is this a Christian story?
Yes.
Is it a religious story? And that is something that we will definitely cover in the next video. So if you want to answer that question, either just hang on if you're in the playlist, or find the video, Is This a Christian Story?